Hi everyone, this is the 6th episode of Mia Talks. Today, we're stepping behind the closed doors of one of the most infamous palaces of the 20th century, a place many called the Palace of Fear. In this episode, we're focusing on Stalin's private life, the man who, when he was at home, was he just a dictator? Or was there a father, a husband, or even a lonely human hidden behind that face? Today, we're talking to Joseph Stalin himself and stepping into his home and private world. Hello, Mr. Stalin. First, I want to know, when you closed the door to your home, who were you really? What sides of you did people never see?
Hello, comrade. I'm not used to anyone asking me about my personal life, but since you've invited me, I'll speak more openly than history ever wrote. For me, home was always where politics and fear met. I was married twice. My first wife was Kato Svanidze. She died very young, around 1907. She was the mother of Yakov, my eldest son. Kato's death was a huge shock to me. It said that at her funeral I remarked, "With her, all my warm human feelings were destroyed." Later, I married Nadezhda Alliluyeva. She was different, with a bright outlook on life. But living beside me, under the shadow of power, was hard for her. In November 1932, Nadezhda died in a suspicious suicide. Rumors spread like wildfire afterward. Some said the political pressure and anxiety of life with me may have played a role. That event left a deep mark on me.
Your relationships with your children are also fascinating. Can you tell us a bit about Yakov, Vasily, and Svetlana? How did they live with you?
Of course. Yakov was my eldest son, a passionate young man, but there was always a distance between us. During World War II, Yakov was captured by the Germans. There were requests for an exchange, but they were rejected. Some believe I abandoned him, even claiming that when the Germans offered to trade him for a general, I turned it down. History will judge. My other son, Vasily, was different, fond of pleasure, sometimes unstable. He was in the military, and his behavior often troubled me. I couldn't fully control him. And Svetlana, my daughter, was probably the closest. When she was little, I'd tell her stories and read her books. There were emotional moments away from the eyes of the regime. But years later, in 1967, she rebelled and defected to the United States. In her memoirs, she wrote that she never truly knew her real father, because Stalin was always hidden behind the curtain of power.
Since you mentioned Yakov's capture, let's dig deeper. Many say your decisions weren't just products of power logic, but came from a darker side of your personality, from fear or a fragile psyche. It's said that when Yakov was captured, you refused to save him to prove your strength. Why didn't you support a prisoner exchange?
In wartime, emotions are like smoke. If you let them linger, they blind you. I was a father, yes, but first I was the leader of a country, losing hundreds of thousands of fathers, sons, and brothers every day. If I made an exception for my own son, how could I ask a simple soldier to die without privilege? When they brought me the news of Yakov's capture, something inside me collapsed, but outwardly I couldn't waver. The German offer to trade him for General Paulus seemed tempting on the surface, but it was really a trap to undermine Soviet authority. If I had agreed, the message would have been, the leader's son's blood is worth more than thousands of other soldiers. No, I wouldn't let emotions taint state decisions. Yakov died in captivity, but I knew that if he lived, he'd have preferred that choice too. He understood that being Stalin's son wasn't a privilege. It was a heavier burden than others carried. Some call this decision heartless, but the truth is, sometimes love shows itself in its harshest form, in silence and self-denial.
Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can keep exploring the next episodes of Mia Talks together. All right, back to our conversation with Mr. Stalin. Where did you live? What were those homes like? Was there a place where you could escape the weight of power?
I lived in the Kremlin for a while, but the place that truly belonged to me was my personal dacha in Kuntsevo, a villa deep in the dense forests west of Moscow. They called it Blizhnaya dacha, meaning the nearby dacha. From the outside, it might have looked like a peaceful house, but inside, a wall of silence flowed. The exterior was green, double security, high protection. Even the driveway to the entrance was winding, so no direct shot could reach the house. In the basement, there was a concrete bunker, with phones connected directly to the Kremlin office. During World War II, I spent most of my time there. Sometimes the sound of airplane engines echoed over Moscow, and I'd sit in my study, smoking, staring at frontline maps. My life was not luxurious. Security was always around me, but freedom was not. That house was a fortress where I was a prisoner of myself. Every step, every visit came with permission and fear. Sometimes I thought the dacha was less a sanctuary and more a prison, only its walls were green.
Many say you even eliminated your closest friends. Is that true? What was the reason?
Yes, it's true. I always said we must cleanse the party from hidden enemies. One example was Nikolai Yevzhov. He was initially head of the NKVD security service and played a major role in the Great Purge, but later became one of its victims, arrested, tried, and executed. Many high-ranking officials who were once my allies were later arrested on charges of treason. It wasn't just about politicians. Even some ordinary friends or colleagues were eliminated. I don't claim I was always right, but in times of threat and suspicion, I preferred to act before betrayal occurred.
About eliminating close allies, you mentioned Yakov. He was once your right-hand man. What made you see someone you worked with as a potential enemy?
Yakov is a clear example. I tasked him to manage the purges, but after a while, his ambitions and actions went too far. He started presenting lists and accusations, sometimes without proper scrutiny. This was a major systemic risk. In politics, the smallest doubt can turn into a conspiracy, and I wasn't willing to tolerate doubts. When I saw Yakov trying to mimic my role, I grew suspicious. I was told he was abusing his influence. I had to show that no one was above the law, not even the closest allies. Eliminating Yakov was a warning. Unlimited loyalty can turn into a threat.
Critics say your personal choices played a big role in these eliminations. Were they purely political tools, or were they personal decisions?
Maybe both. Maybe fear. Maybe. But fear of what? Of the collapse of a country millions hoped in? I buried my emotions to make decisions. Eliminating allies was a political tool, but a tool for survival, not revenge.
Did the inner you and the outer leader ever conflict? For example, how did the father you needed to be coexist with the ruthless political leader?
The conflict was always alive in me. A leader can't completely erase emotions. They just learn to bury them. Inside, there was a father who wanted to play with his child. And outside, A man who had to order millions of fathers into war and death. When Nadezhda committed suicide, something in me died. That day, I didn't just lose my wife, I lost the last piece of my humanity. After that, I never let anyone closer than a certain distance, not even my daughter Svetlana. I remember the night I told her, "Father can't play with you anymore," and the tears in her eyes were something no enemy on the battlefield could awaken in me. But I had learned to see emotion as weakness. A weak leader builds a weak country. So I decided to sacrifice every relationship, every attachment, every tenderness for the greater goal. That was the price I paid for power. Sometimes, in the quiet of Kuntsevo at midnight, I'd wonder, was it worth it? But my mind would immediately answer, that question itself is treason to the revolution. So I'd stay silent, smoke my cigarette to the end, and go back to the maps.
A broader question. Does a leader have the right to bring their private life into politics? Shouldn't the two be separate?
In theory, they're separate, but in practice, when all eyes are on you, private life ceases to exist. Everything about you becomes a weakness or a weapon against you. I didn't choose to bring my private life into politics. Politics invaded my home. If I wanted to survive, my home had to be as secure as my office. Leadership at that level means the destruction of the boundary between inside and outside.
So, from your perspective, the Stalin at home and the Stalin in power weren't two different people.
No. They were two shadows of the same mind. One wanted to rule, the other just wanted to survive.
The Stalin at home and the Stalin behind power, maybe they were never truly separate. But the question remains, if power separates a person from their humanity, can they still be called a leader? If you enjoyed this conversation, like and subscribe to support us so we can bring you the next episodes of Mia Talks with even more energy. Until the next episode, goodbye.